In 1936, the composer Poulenc went to a shrine in his native France on a pilgrimage. This was shortly after a friend of his was killed in a tragic car accident. Writing about that visit to the shrine in his diary sometime later, he said this: "A few days earlier, I had just heard of the tragic death of my colleague. As I meditated on the fragility of our human frame, I was drawn once more to the life of the spirit." It was after that event that Poulenc reconnected with his Catholic faith, and it would be the Catholic faith that would have a very great influence on many of his later compositions. Now, this past week, each day there has been a saint whose feast we've celebrated, except not today, July the 17th. Well, at least not in our country. In France, today is the feast of the Martyrs of Compania. On this date, July 17th, 1794, 16 Carmelite nuns went to their death at the guillotine during the Reign of Terror in France. The Reign of Terror began about a year before their death, and it ended a few weeks after their martyrdom. The Reign of Terror was a time of great suppression and horrific atrocities, including the murder of religious and priests of the Catholic faith. This picture here is one artist's depiction of the moment of prayer before the nuns walk up the scaffolding to their death. It's probably not actually accurate. The women would have had their habits taken from them as they went into prison, and they would have been given prison garb to wear as they went to their death. But it's a moment that depicts them praying before they go to their death. Now, Poulenc wrote an opera based on this story. He knew this story as a Frenchman and as a Catholic. And it's called The Dialogue of the Carmelites. It premiered in Milan in 1957, which happens to be the year I was born. And it is my favorite opera. It is not performed frequently. I have had the blessing to see it twice. The first time I saw it at the Metropolitan Opera House. In the final scene, as the nuns are being led to their death, they begin to sing the Salve Regina. And Poulenc has composed what I think is one of the most hauntingly beautiful and powerful versions of that ancient prayer, the Salve Regina. The nuns begin to sing the song in unison. At first it's halting, and then as the first nun goes to her death, you hear off stage the guillotine go down, and all of a sudden the nuns are struck, and then they begin to sing this song with great power. And they continue to sing it as each one goes to their death, one less voice singing, until there is a solitary voice singing the Salve Regina until she goes to her death, and then there is silence. I was thinking about these martyrs today, and also thinking about Poulenc when I was reading today's readings. And the first reading is from the prophet Isaiah. The gospel is from the Gospel of Matthew. And what normally happens at Sunday or weekday masses is there is a responsorial psalm that we all pray together. Today, the response is not actually a psalm. It is a canticle from the prophet Isaiah. And I'd like to read it to you now, because this is why I thought of these martyrs and Poulenc. In Isaiah it says, "Once I said, in the noontime of my life I must depart. To the gates of the netherworld I shall be consigned for the rest of my years. I said, I shall not see the Lord in the land of the living. No longer shall I behold my fellow men among those who dwell in the world. My dwelling, like a shepherd's tent, is struck down and borne away from me. You have folded up my life like a weaver who severs the last thread. Those live whom the Lord protects. Yours is the life of my spirit. You have given me health and life. You saved my life, O Lord. I shall not die. I thought of that moment when Poulenc writes about being reconnected with the life of the Spirit, when Isaiah says, yours is the life of my spirit. And I thought about those nuns when the last line of the canticle would have been what you, if you were at Mass, your response would have been, you saved my life, O Lord, I shall not die. To think of those nuns going to their death saying, you've saved my life. And while I may physically die, I will not die forever. I will live with the Lord. So I think about those martyrs, and I wonder, especially when you watch it in Poulenc's opera, what gave them the strength, the courage to sing so strongly as they were led to their death, one by one? What gave that final solitary nun the courage when hers was the only voice that was left? I think it was that ancient promise of Isaiah. You saved my life, O Lord. I shall not die. It's the promise of Jesus that life is changed, but never ended. You saved my life, O Lord. I shall not die. Now, none of us will probably ever know what it means to literally die as a martyr, to give your life for your faith. But I think we all know what it means to endure a struggle, to go through a tough moment, to stand unsure of where our life is headed. Most of us have experienced something like that in the last months. Many are still experiencing it now. The promise of Jesus is that he does not save us from struggle or tough moments or uncertainty. The promise of Jesus is that he will save us from allowing that despair, that uncertainty, that disappointment, that conflict from killing us. And I don't mean literally. I mean killing our spirit, killing our hope, our enthusiasm, our trust, our faith, our love. Where do you believe that God has saved you in your life? Saved you from despair or guilt, grief, disappointment, fear, or conflict, prevented those things from doing you in? Have you experienced a moment when you knew that the present difficulty was not the end? It didn't define you. That believing in God's promise is what will always define you. Maybe today you should stay on YouTube right now and see if you could find one of the versions of Poulenc's Salve Regina. Make sure if you put it in the search engine, you also put Dialogue of the Carmelites, because Poulenc wrote more than one Salve Regina. I want you to listen to the one that I am referring to today. Or maybe if you don't do that, you might pray that ancient prayer, Hail, Holy Queen. Or maybe you might just sit for a moment, as Poulenc did, and allow yourself to be drawn to life in the Spirit.